Thank you very much, and I want to thank Terry. Namaskar, Aplok. I want to give you some good news. You've heard quite a bit of grim news for the past couple days. And the good news is that we don't need to think about adaptation and mitigation as alternative choices, because the very technologies which make the climate crisis worse also make resilience for communities harder. And those technologies which will enable our communities to survive a more chaotic climate world, which we're going to have, are also technologies which will help eventually to restore climate stability. Last week, the Chief Minister of Maharashtra announced that it's only the 1st of February, but the state of Maharashtra is shutting down 10% of its thermal power capacity because it lacks water to cool those coal and gas-fired power plants. Maharashtra is not alone. France has periodically had to shut down its nuclear power plants because the water got too hot in the summer and couldn't cool them. And in Texas last summer, in a drought and heat wave, the very peak load gas-fired power plants, which were supposed to keep the air conditioners on hot afternoons, could not operate because it was too hot. So the cold, hard facts are that we are not going to engineer ourselves into resilience. We are not going to engineer ourselves into resilience because there isn't enough money, however creative the Jeff may be, and because there isn't enough knowledge. If you tell me what the climate will be like in New York City in 50 years, I can rebuild the subways for that climate. Engineering can do that. But if you tell me you really don't know, and in fact the one thing you are certain of is that the climate of New York will be more chaotic in 50 years, I cannot engineer the subways against chaos. I have to do something else. And that something else is I have to use ecosystems. I have to use soft resilience, not engineering resilience. I'll give a story from India that happened long before we knew about climate change. In 1847, the East India Company thought that Calcutta was inconveniently far from the ocean, so they moved their capital down to the front islands of the Sundarbans. There were some voices warning them not to. They ignored them. They built a new capital. The new capital survived, I believe, for 7 years. In 7 years, the cyclone came, and the British sensibly and wisely scuttled back behind the mangroves to Calcutta. They didn't try to engineer Calcutta into resilience. They took advantage of a natural ecosystem, the Sundarbans, and they kept their capital safe for the last 2 centuries. That's what we're going to need to do. We're going to need to recognize that it is ecosystems which protect communities from chaotic climate. If you fly over South Asia, you will see vast areas which were once forests and which could again be forests, but which currently have very minimal vegetative load. If we restored the vegetation on those slopes, which mainly means leaving them alone, the seeds will fall, the rains will fall, the grasses will grow, the trees will take their place if we let them. And if we do that, then in droughts, and India will have more droughts, Pakistan will have more droughts, more water will be stored in the soil by that vegetation. And in heavy monsoons, which India is going to have more of, and Pakistan is going to have more of, the water will be stored in the mountains instead of washing down to destroy cities and croplands. We're going to need to use ecosystems to get ourselves into resilience. In the wake of Hurricane Sandy, New York City faces a major challenge. What does it do about the fact that it is, in fact, North America's most hurricane vulnerable city? One theory is we should do what the Dutch have done so well. We should try to engineer ourselves into protecting New York City with massive floodgates and sea gates. That may work for Lower Manhattan, but that will not work for the entire New York City metropolitan area. Even in New York, there is not enough money to protect the entire metropolitan area from a major hurricane like Sandy. So what's the alternative? We can restore the oyster beds, which actually provide enormous protection against storm surge. What does it take to restore oyster beds? Billions of dollars? No. It takes some seed oysters. It takes getting rid of the pollution. It takes doing things that make New York City healthier and which will enable New York City to weather the climate chaos that is to come. If we continue to think about adaptation and mitigation, about preventing climate change and preparing for climate change as an alternative strategy, we will not be able to be systematic. We will, as the last speaker said, build projects here and projects there, but we will not build a resilient landscape and we will not build a stable climate. If we recognize that the only thing that is strong enough and smart enough and wise enough to take carbon out of the atmosphere is a plant, and that the only thing which is smart enough and wise enough and strong enough to protect New Orleans against a hurricane is also a plant. We have our solution. We need to restore the biological productivity of every part of every landscape. And that is mainly a matter of stopping our abuse of them. They actually will come back on their own, at least as long as there's water. Wet landscapes come back very quickly if they're left alone. So the real question for us is simply this: not can we find billions and trillions of dollars to build ever more complicated structures to survive ever less predictable weather events. I don't think that will work. The question for us is, can we have the wisdom to understand that if we simply view our landscapes as gardens, not mines, and let them restore themselves, we're probably going to do as much as is possible both to stabilize our climate and protect our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl.